They made the obese girl wear a collar and crawl. The mountain man put that collar on them. The summer of 1823 bore down on Dust Hollow like a furnace, turning the already parched earth into cracked leather beneath the relentless sun. The settlement sat at the edge of civilization, a collection of weathered buildings that served trappers, traders, and those seeking fortune in the untamed wilderness beyond the Missouri River. Among these structures stood the Silver Coyote, a modest trading post and drinking establishment where frontier men gathered to escape the harshness of their lives. Ella Moore had worked at the Silver Coyote for 3 years, since her father died of fever and left her with nowhere else to go. She was a large woman, her size the subject of endless commentary in a place where survival often meant going hungry. But Ella possessed a gentle spirit that refused to harden despite the cruelty she faced daily. She kept the establishment clean, served drinks without complaint, and asked for nothing more than a corner to sleep and enough food to sustain her. The afternoon of August 14th began like any other. Ella wiped down the rough-hewn tables while a handful of trappers nursed their whiskey in the dim interior, seeking refuge from the oppressive heat. The relative peace shattered when Tanner Briggs burst through the door, followed by his usual companions, Marcus Webb, the banker's nephew, Cole Hutchins, whose family owned the largest ranch within 200 miles, and Samuel Pine, son of the settlement's only doctor. These young men, none older than 25, represented the closest thing Dust Hollow had to aristocracy. They wore finer clothes than the average trapper, carried pistols with engraved handles, and possessed the dangerous combination of wealth, boredom, and a complete absence of consequences for their actions. Tanner's father, Sheriff Clayton Briggs, had long ago decided that boys would be boys, and his son's behavior was merely high spirits. "Ella," Tanner's voice boomed across the room, already slurred from drinking elsewhere. "Bring us your finest whiskey, and be quick about it, unless you want to roll here like the barrel you resemble." Laughter erupted from his companions. Ella felt the familiar burn of shame, but kept her eyes down, retrieving the requested bottle. She had learned that acknowledging their taunts only encouraged more. As she approached their table, Marcus stuck out his boot, sending her stumbling. The whiskey bottle flew from her hands, shattering against the floor in an explosion of glass and amber liquid. The room fell silent, except for the cruel laughter of the 4 young men. "Look at that," Cole drawled. "Can't even walk straight, like watching a drunk buffalo." Ella dropped to her knees, gathering the broken glass with trembling hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll clean this up. I'll pay for the bottle." "Pay for it?" Tanner stood, swaying slightly. An ugly gleam entered his eyes, the look he got when simple mockery no longer satisfied him. "How? You don't have 2 coins to rub together." He pulled a leather cord from his saddlebag, the kind used for leading horses. "I've got a better idea. Entertainment for everyone." Before Ella could react, Tanner grabbed her arm and hauled her to the center of the room. The trappers at the other tables shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. In Dust Hollow, you didn't interfere with the sheriff's son unless you wanted trouble. "You're fat as a hog, Ella," Tanner announced, addressing the room like a showman. "So why should you walk on 2 legs like decent folk? Get down on all 4s where you belong." "Please," Ella's voice broke. "Don't do this." "Down!" Tanner shoved her shoulder, forcing her to her hands and knees on the dirty floor. The other 3 closed in, forming a circle around her. Marcus produced a leather collar from somewhere, the kind used for large dogs. A small metal plate dangled from it, crudely engraved with the word dog. "This seems fitting," Marcus said, fastening it around Ella's neck despite her protests. "Now you look the part." "Crawl," Tanner commanded, attaching the leather cord to the collar like a leash. "All the way around the room. Let everyone see what happens to those who can't keep up in this world." Tears streamed down Ella's face as she began to move on her hands and knees, Tanner yanking the cord whenever she slowed. The humiliation felt like physical pain, worse than any blow. The laughter of the four young men mixed with the uncomfortable silence of the other patrons, creating a memory that would sear itself into her soul. "Remember this, Ella," Tanner said when she completed the circuit, his breath hot and reeking of alcohol. "People like you are born to be entertainment for your betters. That's your purpose." He raised his glass in a mock toast, and his companions joined him. "Interesting philosophy," a voice rumbled from the darkest corner of the room, where the sunlight couldn't reach. "Though I've found that dogs possess more loyalty, courage, and worth than most men I've encountered. This young woman certainly has more dignity than what I'm witnessing here." Every head turned toward the speaker. From the shadows emerged a figure that seemed carved from the wilderness itself. Elias Kane stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders draped in a coat made from wolf pelts. His beard, dark and thick, couldn't hide the scars that marked his weathered face. He wore the practical clothing of a mountain man: buckskins, tall boots, a wide-brimmed hat that had seen years of hard use. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, gray as winter storms, holding a coldness that spoke of violence witnessed and delivered. Those who knew anything about the frontier knew of Elias Kane. He trapped beaver in territories where others feared to venture. He'd survived 3 winters in the Rockies alone. Rumors suggested he'd killed 7 men in various confrontations, though no one knew the exact number. The Crow respected him, the Blackfeet avoided him, and settlers generally gave him wide berth. He came to civilization only to trade his furs and resupply before vanishing into the wilderness again. Tanner, emboldened by whiskey and his father's position, straightened. "This doesn't concern you, Kane. Why don't you go back to whatever cave you crawled from?" Elias moved with surprising speed for a man his size, crossing the room in long strides. He stopped inches from Tanner, towering over him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "I wonder," Elias said softly, his voice more menacing for its quietness, "whether you boys have ever experienced what you just inflicted. Have you ever worn a collar? Crawled while others laughed?" "You threatening me?" Tanner's hand moved toward his pistol. "My father." "Your father isn't here." Elias's hand shot out, faster than a snake strike, gripping Tanner's wrist before the young man could draw. "And I asked you a question." The other 3 moved to help their friend, but Elias's free hand produced a knife seemingly from nowhere, its blade gleaming in the lamplight. He drove it point first into the table beside them with tremendous force, the weapon quivering from the impact. "Stay where you are," Elias commanded, and they froze. He turned his attention back to Tanner, twisting the young man's arm until he cried out and dropped to his knees. With his other hand, Elias removed the collar from Ella's neck. "Since you seem to think this is appropriate," Elias said, fastening the collar around Tanner's throat, "let me help you understand its purpose better." What followed would be spoken of in Dust Hollow for years to come. Elias forced Tanner to crawl the same circuit Ella had been made to travel, the leather cord held firmly in the mountain man's grip. When Marcus tried to intervene, Elias tripped him effortlessly, and before the young man could rise, the collar was around his neck too. "Your turn," Elias said flatly. One by one, he subjected each of the 4 tormentors to the same humiliation they'd inflicted. Cole soiled himself in fear, creating a stench that filled the room. Samuel begged for mercy that Elias ignored with the same indifference they'd shown Ella. The trappers watched in stunned silence, some with barely concealed satisfaction. These young peacocks had lorded their privilege over everyone for too long. When all 4 had completed their crawl, Elias gathered them in the center of the room. They knelt there, faces red with shame and rage, clothing dirty from the floor. "You have a choice," Elias announced. "You can apologize to Miss Moore with genuine sincerity. Or I can take you into the wilderness, and your fathers can come looking for what's left." The threat wasn't empty. Everyone in the room knew it. "We're sorry," Marcus mumbled first, unable to meet Ella's eyes. Louder, Elias demanded. And say her name. She's a person, not a thing to ignore. We're sorry, Ella, they chorused, each voice carrying varying degrees of resentment and fear. Miss Moore, Elias corrected. Address her properly. We're sorry, Miss Moore. Elias looked at Ella, who stood trembling, her hand touching her neck where the collar had been. Is this sufficient, ma'am? Or would you prefer further retribution? Ella shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Then get out, Elias told the four young men, removing the collars and throwing them at Tanner's feet. And if I hear of you troubling Miss Moore again, if I hear you've so much as looked at her wrong, I'll be back. And next time, there won't be apologies. We'll settle matters in a more permanent fashion. They scrambled for the door, their dignity in tatters. Elias turned to the room at large. That goes for anyone else who might think this woman deserves mockery. She works hard, causes no trouble, and treats folks decent. That's more than I can say for most. Anyone disagrees with me? Silence answered him. Good. He retrieved his knife from the table, sheathed it, and approached Ella. Miss Moore, perhaps you'd like some fresh air. This establishment has developed an unpleasant atmosphere. Outside the Silver Coyote, the evening air carried a slight coolness, relief after the day's heat. Ella leaned against the building's wall, her legs shaking so badly she feared she might collapse. The tears came then, all the fear and humiliation pouring out in great racking sobs. Elias stood a respectful distance away, his eyes scanning the dusty street. He learned long ago that sometimes people needed space to process their emotions. When her crying subsided, Ella wiped her face with her apron. Why did you do that? You didn't have to involve yourself. Now you've made enemies of powerful families. Those aren't men, Elias said quietly. They're children playing dress-up with their father's influence. Real power doesn't come from titles or money. It comes from surviving when everything tries to kill you. Still, you took a risk for someone you don't even know. Elias was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried an old pain. I had a sister once, Rebecca. She was different. Born with a twisted leg, couldn't walk right. The children in our settlement tormented her constantly, called her names, pushed her down, made her life miserable. He paused, his jaw clenching. I was young, maybe 14, too scared of what others would think to stand up for her. One winter she wandered into the woods to escape the taunting. We found her 3 days later, frozen. I'm so sorry, Ella whispered. I swore that day I'd never watch someone suffer that kind of cruelty again without acting. Money can't buy back what I lost, but it can prevent others from feeling the way Rebecca must have felt, alone and worthless. They stood in companionable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Where will you go now? Ella asked. Back to the mountains? Eventually. I've got furs to trade first, supplies to gather. Probably be here a week or so. He glanced at her. What about you? Will you stay at the Silver Coyote? I don't have anywhere else to go. Shame, Elias said. You deserve better than serving drinks to men who don't appreciate honest work. Over the following days, something unexpected developed. Elias found himself spending more time in Dust Hollow than he'd planned. He'd returned from trading his pelts to find Ella finishing her work at the trading post, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. She learned about his life in the wilderness, the brutal winters, encounters with grizzly bears, the breathtaking beauty of mountain valleys where no white man had ever set foot. He learned about her childhood on a small farm, her mother who died in childbirth, her father who'd tried his best but eventually succumbed to frontier fever. You ever think about leaving? Elias asked one evening as they sat outside the settlement, watching the stars emerge. Every day, Ella admitted, but I'm practical enough to know my limitations. I'm not built for traveling or surviving in harsh conditions. You're tougher than you think, Elias said. Strength isn't just about body, it's about spirit. and yours hasn't broken despite everything trying to crack it." Their conversations continued, and Elias found himself sharing things he'd never told another soul. The loneliness of trapping alone for months, the guilt he carried over Rebecca, the way violence had become so natural to him that he sometimes wondered if he could ever truly live among civilized people again. Ella, in turn, revealed her deepest fears, that she'd die alone in Dust Hollow, that she was exactly what Tanner had said, worthless. Elias's response was immediate and fierce. "Don't you ever believe that," he said, his hand covering hers. The touch surprised them both. "You're worth 10 of those fools, worth more than most people I've met in this life." On the 7th day of Elias's stay, he found Ella after her work and made an unexpected proposal. "There's a place west of here," he said, "a creek that runs clear and cold from the mountains. Beautiful spot, peaceful. I thought you might like to see it." "Is it far?" "Couple hours on horseback. We'd be back before dark." Ella hesitated. She'd never ridden a horse before, and the idea of venturing beyond the settlement frightened her. But something in Elias's expression, hope perhaps, or loneliness seeking connection, made her agree. The ride was awkward at first. Ella sat behind Elias on his sturdy mount, her arms around his waist, terrified she'd fall. But his steady presence calmed her, and eventually she relaxed enough to notice the landscape they passed through. Endless rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers, occasional stands of cottonwood trees marking water sources. The creek Elias had mentioned proved worth the journey. Crystal water tumbled over smooth rocks, creating a gentle music. Willows and aspens lined its banks, their leaves rustling in the breeze. It felt like a different world from the dust and harshness of the settlement. "It's beautiful," Ella breathed. "I come here sometimes when I need to remember there's more to life than survival," Elias said, helping her dismount. "Seemed like you might benefit from the reminder, too." They sat on the bank and Elias pulled something from his saddlebag: bread, cheese, dried meat. "Figured you might be hungry." As they ate, Elias asked, "You ever fire a gun?" Ella shook her head. "Might be useful to learn, just in case." He retrieved his rifle. "Come on, I'll teach you." The lesson went poorly at first. The rifle was heavy, the kick surprised her, and she missed every target Elias set up. But he proved patient, adjusting her stance, showing her how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull. On her 10th attempt, she struck a piece of wood he'd propped against a rock. "There!" Elias's rare smile transformed his scarred face. "You're a natural." "Hardly," Ella laughed, but she felt a surge of pride. They spent the afternoon by the creek. Elias taught her to identify edible plants, how to read animal tracks, basic survival skills. In return, Ella shared stories from her childhood, making him laugh with tales of farm mishaps and small-town gossip. As the sun began its descent, Elias's expression grew serious. "I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Those boys, Tanner and his friends, have they left you alone?" "Yes," Ella confirmed. "They avoid me completely now. Cross the street if they see me coming." "Good. But I won't be here much longer. I've got obligations, territories to trap before winter. I worry about leaving you here." "I'll manage," Ella said, though the thought of his departure left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. "You could come with me." The words hung in the air between them, enormous in their implications. To the mountains? Ella couldn't hide her shock. "Elias, I'm not built for that life. I'd slow you down, be a burden." "You'd be company," he interrupted. "Someone to talk to besides my own thoughts. Someone who sees me as more than a violent mountain man." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable with the vulnerability. "Look, I know it's sudden. We've only known each other a week, but I've spent years alone, and I'm tired of it. You're trapped in a place that doesn't value you. Maybe we could be trapped together instead, or maybe find something that isn't a trap at all." Ella didn't answer immediately. The proposal was absurd, impossible, and yet she'd felt more alive in the past week than in all her years at Dust Hollow. Elias saw her as a person, not a burden or object of mockery. With him, she didn't feel the constant weight of shame. "I need time to think," she finally said. Fair enough. Elias began preparing for the return journey. "But don't take too long. I'm planning to leave in 3 days." The ride back to Dust Hollow felt different, charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. When they arrived, Elias helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "know that I meant what I said earlier. You're worth more than this place will ever recognize." The next 2 days tortured Ella with indecision. Leave everything she knew, limited as it was, for the complete unknown? Trust a man she'd met only a week ago, heading into wilderness that killed experienced frontiersmen? But what was the alternative? Years more of serving drinks, enduring disrespect, growing old alone in a settlement that would never truly accept her? On the evening of the second day, Tanner Briggs appeared at the Silver Coyote. Ella's blood ran cold when she saw him enter, but he approached with hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said quickly. "My father sent me. He wants to know if you're planning to leave with Kane." "Why does the sheriff care what I do?" Tanner had the grace to look ashamed. "Because if you go, he wants to know so he can look the other way, not make it difficult." "Why would he help me?" "Because Kane scared the hell out of all of us," Tanner admitted. "And because my father said what we did was wrong. He said Kane was right. You work hard and don't cause trouble, and we treated you terribly. This is his way of making amends, clearing any obstacles if you want to go." After Tanner left, Ella realized her decision had been made. Perhaps it had been made days ago, and she'd simply been too frightened to acknowledge it. She found Elias at the stable, preparing his horses for departure. "I'll go with you," she said without preamble, "if the offer still stands." The smile that spread across Elias's face made her heart skip. "It stands, but I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. The mountains are beautiful, but brutal. We'll face hunger, cold, danger from animals, and possibly hostile tribes. You might die out there." "I might die here too," Ella countered. "At least in the mountains, I'll die free." They departed Dust Hollow before dawn 3 days later. Elias had purchased a second horse for Ella and spent the previous day teaching her to ride properly. Her belongings fit in a single pack. She owned so little that leaving required almost no preparation. As they rode west toward the mountains visible on the horizon, Ella felt terror and exhilaration warring within her. She was 26 years old and had never been more than 5 miles from the settlement where she'd spent her entire life. "Scared?" Elias asked, noticing her white-knuckled grip on the reins. "Terrified," she admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you alert. It's when you get comfortable that the wilderness kills you." The first weeks tested Ella beyond anything she'd imagined. Her body, unused to long days in the saddle, ached constantly. Simple tasks like setting up camp or gathering firewood exhausted her. She fell into her bedroll each night too tired even to eat. But Elias proved endlessly patient. He showed her how to pack a horse properly, how to start a fire in wind and rain, how to purify water from streams. When she struggled with the physical demands, he adjusted their pace, built in rest periods, never made her feel inadequate. "You're doing fine," he'd say when she apologized for slowing them down. "Better than fine. Most people raised in settlements can't adapt to this life. You're stronger than you know." Slowly, incredibly, Ella began to believe him. Her body grew stronger, muscles developing where only softness had been. The constant movement and simpler diet, game meat, wild plants, whatever they could hunt or gather, changed her physically, but more importantly, it changed how she saw herself. She was surviving. More than surviving. She was learning, adapting, becoming capable. One evening, about 2 months into their journey, They made camp near a stream in the foothills of the Rockies. Snow already dusted the highest peaks, though the lower elevations still enjoyed mild weather. Elias was cleaning the rabbit they'd have for dinner when Ella approached him, her expression serious. "I need to say something," she began. "I haven't thanked you properly. For what you did in Dust Hollow, for bringing me here, for your patience teaching me. You've given me a life I never imagined possible." "You've given me something too," Elias said, setting aside the rabbit. "Purpose beyond just surviving. Someone who sees past the violence to whatever might be underneath." "I see a good man who was shaped by hard circumstances," Ella said softly. "A man capable of great gentleness despite, or perhaps because of, the harshness he's known." They'd grown closer during their travels, the forced intimacy of shared campsites and long days riding side by side creating a bond deeper than mere friendship. But neither had spoken of it directly until now. "Ella," Elias said, standing to face her, "I'm not a man given to pretty words or romantic gestures. My life is hard and it's likely to stay that way. But I've come to care for you deeply, more than I thought I could care for anyone after Rebecca." "I care for you too," Ella admitted, her heart racing. "I think I have since that first day when you stood up for me." He cupped her face gently in his scarred, calloused hands. "Then let's make this official. In the eyes of God and the wilderness, will you be my wife?" "Yes," Ella whispered, and he kissed her. They wintered in a valley Elias had used before, sheltered by mountains on 3 sides and fed by a spring that never froze. He had built a small cabin there years ago, maintained it on his annual visits. The cabin was rough but solid, one room with a stone fireplace, a sleeping platform, and basic amenities. Elias had stockpiled firewood and supplies, and together they hunted and preserved enough meat to see them through the coldest months. That winter transformed their relationship. The forced closeness, the absolute dependence on each other for survival and companionship created an intimacy Ella had never experienced. They talked for hours by firelight, made love in the warmth of their furs, learned each other's rhythms and needs. Elias taught her to read animal signs, to predict weather changes, to survive if ever separated. Ella taught him gentleness, how to laugh freely, how to trust another person completely. Spring arrived with rushing snowmelt and the return of migrating birds. Ella stood outside the cabin one morning, hand resting on her stomach, feeling the flutter of life within. She'd known for weeks but hadn't told Elias, uncertain how he'd react. A child complicated everything: travel, trapping, survival. But that morning, watching him split wood for their fire, she knew she couldn't wait longer. "Elias," she called, "I need to tell you something." He set down the axe, reading the seriousness in her expression, and approached. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant. About 3 months along, I think." The emotions that crossed his face, shock, fear, then overwhelming joy, told her everything she needed to know. "A baby," he breathed, dropping to his knees and pressing his ear to her stomach as if he might hear the life within. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Ella asked, though his reaction had already answered. "Terrified," he admitted, looking up at her with tears in his eyes. "And happier than I've ever been. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. A family." Batido. Their daughter arrived with the first snows of the following winter, a healthy girl with her father's gray eyes and her mother's gentle spirit. They named her Rebecca, honoring the sister Elias had lost. The birth was difficult, and there were moments when Elias feared he'd lose them both. But Ella proved as tough as the wilderness that had shaped her, and she brought their daughter into the world with only Elias there to help. Holding Rebecca for the first time, Elias wept openly. "I never thought I'd get this chance," he told Ella, "to protect someone innocent, to raise a child who will know she's loved and valued." "She'll know," Ella assured him. "We'll make sure of it." They spent another year in the valley, adjusting to life with an infant in the wilderness. Ella marveled at the fierce protectiveness she felt, the way motherhood unlocked reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. When Rebecca was old enough to travel safely, they made occasional trips to trading posts to sell Elias's furs and purchase supplies. At one such post, they encountered a family from Dust Hollow. The woman recognized Ella immediately. "Miss Moore, we heard you'd gone off with that mountain man. Everyone assumed you were dead." "Very much alive," Ella said. Rebecca strapped to her back in the cradle board Elias had crafted. "Happier than I've ever been." "You look wonderful," the woman said, and meant it. Ella had transformed from the timid, humiliated girl who'd crawled across a saloon floor. She stood straight now, confident, her body lean and strong from wilderness living. Later, Elias asked, "Any regrets about leaving that life?" Ella looked at him, at their sleeping daughter, at the mountains that had become their home. "Not a single one. They treated me like a dog in Dust Hollow, said I was worthless. You showed me I was wrong to believe them." "You were never worthless," Elias said firmly. "The world was just too small and cruel to recognize your value." "You told me once that I reminded you of a dog," Ella said with a smile. "I said you were loyal, honest, and worth more than most people I'd met," Elias corrected, pulling her close. "And I was right." Years passed. Rebecca grew strong and wild, as comfortable in the mountains as any creature born there. Elias and Ella added 2 more children to their family, a boy they named Thomas and another girl they called Sarah. Their life was hard, demanding constant work and vigilance, but it was theirs, built on mutual respect, love, and the shared understanding that they'd each been broken by the world before finding each other. On warm evenings, they'd sit outside their cabin while the children played, watching the sun paint the mountain peaks in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you ever think about that day?" Ella would sometimes ask. "In the Silver Coyote?" "Sometimes," Elias would admit. "It was the day I found my purpose again, not just surviving, but living, protecting what matters." "Thank you," Ella would say, as she had countless times, "for seeing me when no one else did." "Thank you," Elias would respond, "for teaching me that strength comes in many forms, and that it's never too late to start over." Their story became legend in the scattered settlements of the frontier. The mountain man who'd humbled the rich boys, the woman who'd left civilization for the wilderness and thrived. But for Elias and Ella, it was simply their life, hard-won, deeply valued, and completely their own. They'd both worn collars once, his forged from guilt and violence, hers from society's cruelty. But together, in the vast freedom of the mountains, they'd broken those bonds and built something beautiful from the pieces. Their children grew knowing they were loved, that strength meant standing up for those who couldn't stand for themselves, that true worth came from character, not circumstance. And when Rebecca, their eldest, asked about her namesake, they told her the truth, that she was named for a girl who died alone, so that their daughter might always remember the importance of protecting those who were different or vulnerable. The mountains had given them everything: home, purpose, family. And in return, they'd given the mountains their loyalty, their respect, and their enduring love. Some stories end with vengeance. This one ended with redemption, proving that sometimes the greatest revenge is living well, loving deeply, and refusing to let cruelty define your worth. They poured hot soup on the obese girl. As a joke, the mountain man made them drink boiling water. The summer of 1859 pressed down on Red Hollow like a blacksmith's anvil, heavy and unforgiving. The frontier town squatted at the edge of civilization, where the Wyoming Territory bled into Montana's untamed mountains. Here, the law was whatever Sheriff Dalton said it was, which often meant looking the other way when the right people caused trouble. Clara May Winters had learned this truth the hard way, though she'd never speak it aloud. At 23, she carried her weight like an apology, shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller, invisible. Her brown hair, always tied back in a simple bun, framed a face that might have been pretty if anyone had bothered to look past her size. She didn't expect kindness anymore. She only asked for dignity, and even that seemed too much to hope for in Red Hollow. Every morning before dawn, Clara walked the dusty half-mile from her father's cabin to the Golden Spoon, the town's largest restaurant. Her father, Thomas Winters, had been a trapper once, legendary for his skills. Now he lay wasting away from lung sickness, coughing blood into rags while Clara worked 16-hour days to pay Doc Morrison for medicines that only slowed the inevitable. The Golden Spoon belonged to Mrs. Henrietta Walsh, a widow who ran the establishment with stern efficiency. She paid Clara barely enough to survive, but it was work, and work was scarce for someone like her. Clara washed dishes until her hands cracked and bled, scrubbed floors until her knees ached, and endured the casual cruelty of customers who seemed to think her weight gave them permission to mock. "Girl's so fat, she probably eats the scraps before the hogs get 'em," one drover had said last week, loud enough for the whole dining room to hear. The laughter that followed had cut deeper than any knife, but Clara endured. She had to. Her father needed her. The trouble began on a Thursday afternoon in late August. The heat hung thick as molasses, making everyone irritable. The dining room buzzed with the usual crowd, miners fresh from the hills, cowboys between cattle drives, merchants discussing grain prices. Clara moved through the kitchen like a ghost, staying out of sight, preferring the company of dirty dishes to judgmental stares. She was ladling beef stew into bowls when she heard them: Colt Hastings and his friends, Jake Mercer and Billy Tate. The three were infamous in Red Hollow, sons of wealthy ranchers who thought their money bought them immunity from consequences. They drank too much, fought too often, and treated anyone beneath their social standing like dirt. "Service here's slower than a three-legged mule," Colt announced, his voice already slurred from afternoon whiskey. "Where's that fat kitchen girl? We want food." Clara's stomach clenched. Mrs. Walsh was out back accepting a supply delivery. The regular server, Mary, had gone home sick. That left only Clara. She took a deep breath, steadied the tray carrying 3 bowls of steaming soup, and pushed through the swinging kitchen door. The dining room fell into that particular kind of silence that preceded mockery. Clara kept her eyes down, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. The tray felt heavier with each step, her hands trembling slightly. "Well, well," Colt drawled, grinning at his companions. "Looks like they sent out the main course to deliver the appetizers." Laughter erupted. Clara's face burned, but she pressed forward, setting the bowls down as quickly as possible. "Please enjoy your meal," she whispered, turning to leave. "Hold on there, porker." Billy Tate grabbed her wrist. "This soup's too hot. You trying to burn us?" I'm sorry. It just came off the stove. If you wait a few..." "Wait?" Jake Mercer stood, swaying slightly. "We don't wait for nothing. Especially not for some fat cow who probably drinks the soup herself when nobody's looking." Clara tried to pull away, but Billy's grip tightened. Fear replaced embarrassment. These men were dangerous. Everyone knew it. But they were also untouchable. Their fathers owned half the county. "You know what?" Colt picked up his bowl, soup still steaming. "I bet someone your size doesn't even feel heat. All that blubber must be like insulation, right, boys?" Clara saw it coming but couldn't move fast enough. Colt stepped forward and upended the entire bowl over her head. The burning liquid cascaded down her face, her neck, soaking through her dress to the skin beneath. The pain was instantaneous and excruciating, like being pressed against a hot stove. Clara screamed, a sound of pure animal agony, and collapsed to her knees. Her hands flew to her face, trying to wipe away the scalding soup, but that only spread it further. The dining room exploded with laughter. Through her tears and pain, Clara heard them, rough men and refined ladies alike, all laughing at her suffering. Some covered their mouths politely, others slapped tables in mirth. Billy poured his bowl over her back for good measure, eliciting fresh waves of laughter. Clara curled on the floor, sobbing, her skin already blistering. The pain was unbearable, but worse was the humiliation, the knowledge that her torment was entertainment. Then the door crashed open. The laughter died as if someone had cut its throat. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by harsh sunlight, his massive frame filling the entrance. He was easily 6.5 feet tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in buckskin and fur. A thick black beard covered the lower half of his face, and his eyes, gray as winter storms, swept across the room with cold assessment. Elias Boone, the mountain man. Everyone in Red Hollow knew of him, though few knew him personally. He lived alone up on Elk Ridge, coming to town maybe 4 times a year for supplies. Rumors swirled around him like snow, that he'd been a soldier once, that he'd killed a grizzly with just a knife, that he'd turned his back on civilization after some tragedy nobody could quite name. Those storm-gray eyes found Clara on the floor, took in her burned, soup-soaked form, then slowly, deliberately, moved to the 3 men still laughing. Who did this? His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but something in it made the hair on every neck stand up. The laughter stopped completely. Colt, emboldened by whiskey and his father's money, sneered. Did what? We were just having a little fun with the kitchen pig. She probably enjoyed the bath. He didn't finish the sentence. Elias crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbed Colt by the throat and slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack the wood paneling. The outlaw's feet dangled 6 inches off the floor. Fun? Elias's voice never rose above that dangerous whisper. You think burning someone is fun? My father owns half this town, Colt choked out. You're dead. Probably. Elias's grip didn't loosen. But you'll get there first if you don't shut your mouth. He dropped Colt, who collapsed gasping. Then Elias turned to the kitchen, where he could see the stove through the open door. A pot of water boiled there, preparing for the evening's coffee. Elias walked to it, lifted the heavy pot with one hand, and returned to the dining room. He set it on Colt's table with a heavy thunk. Then he reached behind the bar and pulled out 3 tin cups, setting one before each of the 3 men. Drink, he said simply. What? Billy laughed nervously. That's boiling water, you crazy mountain man. We ain't drinking that. You just poured boiling soup on a defenseless woman. For a joke. Elias filled the first cup to the brim. Steam rose from it like a ghost. So drink. Be funny. Make me laugh. You can't make us, Jake started. Elias picked up the cup and threw its contents in Jake's face. Jake's scream was inhuman, a shriek of pure agony as the boiling water seared his skin. He fell from his chair, clawing at his face, rolling on the floor exactly as Clara had done moments before. You're right, Elias said calmly, refilling the cup. I can't make you drink it, but I can make you wear it. Your choice. Billy's bravado evaporated. His face went pale as milk. Please, we didn't mean... Didn't mean what? Didn't mean to burn her? Didn't mean to laugh while she screamed? Elias set the full cup before Billy. Funny how intentions only matter when it's you suffering. Colt, recovering his breath, reached for the pistol at his hip. Elias moved faster than a man his size should, drawing a massive knife from his belt and driving it through Colt's hand, pinning it to the table. Colt's scream joined Jake's still ongoing howls. Touch that gun again. You lose the hand, Elias said. Now. Here's what's going to happen. You 3 are going to leave. You're going to tell everyone in this town that Clara May Winters is under my protection. If anyone hurts her, looks at her wrong, or makes her feel less than human, I will find out, and I will come back. He pulled the knife free with a wet sound. Colt clutched his bleeding hand to his chest. And if you think your father's money means anything to me, Elias continued, remember this. I live in the mountains. You can't buy me, you can't threaten me, and you sure as hell can't hide from me. Understood?" The three men stumbled toward the door, Billy and Colt supporting the still screaming Jake between them. The entire dining room watched in stunned silence. Elias turned to where Clara still lay on the floor, her sobs quieter now, but her pain obvious. He knelt beside her, his large, calloused hand gentle as he touched her shoulder. "Can you stand?" She nodded, though she clearly couldn't. Without hesitation, Elias scooped her up as if she weighed nothing at all. Clara was too shocked and hurt to protest. "Mrs. Walsh," Elias called toward the kitchen, where the proprietor had finally emerged, her face white with shock. "I'm taking her to get treated. Send the doctor's bill to me." But Mr. Boone, you can't just—" "I just did." He looked around the dining room at the frozen patrons. "And the rest of you. You laughed. You sat there and laughed while she burned. You're all guilty. Remember that when you say your prayers tonight." He carried Clara out into the harsh afternoon sun, leaving behind a room full of people who suddenly couldn't meet each other's eyes. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride. She became aware of being on a horse, held securely against a broad chest that smelled of pine and leather and wood smoke. The pain was constant, a burning that seemed to go bone deep, but the motion of the horse was oddly soothing. When she opened her eyes fully, they were beside a creek. The water burbled over smooth stones, and the trees here were thick enough to provide blessed shade. Elias had dismounted and was wetting cloths in the cold mountain stream. "This will hurt," he said, "but it'll help. The cold water will stop the burning and clean the wounds." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. He was right. When he pressed the first cold cloth to her face, she hissed with pain. But after a few moments, the relief was undeniable. The burning lessened to something almost bearable. Elias worked with surprising gentleness for such a large, rough-looking man. He cleaned her burns methodically, talking in a low, calm voice as he worked. "I served as a field medic in the Mexican War," he explained. "Saw more burns than I care to remember. Powder burns, mostly. The key is keeping them clean and cool. You've got second-degree burns on your face, neck, and upper back. They'll hurt like hell for a while, might scar some, but you'll heal." "Why?" Clara finally managed to whisper. "Why did you help me?" Elias paused, cloth dripping in his hand. His gray eyes met hers, and she saw something there, an old pain, carefully buried but never quite gone. "Because nobody else did," he said simply. "And because I know what it's like to be treated as less than human. Different reasons than yours, but the feeling's the same." He applied a salve to her burns, something that smelled of herbs and honey. His cabin, it turned out, was another hour's ride up into the mountains. It was a solid structure, built with obvious skill from pine logs, with a stone chimney and real glass windows, luxuries in the wilderness. Inside, everything was neat and orderly. Furs covered the floor. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with cooking implements hanging beside it. Shelves held books, more books than Clara had ever seen outside of the general store. A bearskin rug sprawled before the hearth, and dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams. "You'll stay here until you heal," Elias said, setting her down on a bed covered in soft pelts. "I'll sleep by the fire. There's a necessary out back, and the creek's 50 yards that way for washing. I'll get your things from town tomorrow." "I can't," Clara protested weakly. "My father, I'll check on him too, make sure he has food and medicine. But Clara," he crouched beside the bed, his face serious, "you can't go back there yet. Not to that town, not to those people. You need time to heal body and spirit. And you need to understand something." "What?" "You didn't deserve what happened today, not any of it. Not the burning, not the laughter, not the years of mockery I suspect came before. Whatever the world has told you about your worth, it lied." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, stinging her burns. She'd heard platitudes before, empty reassurances from people who pitied her. But something in Elias's voice, in his eyes, told her he meant every word. He understood. That night, as she lay in his bed and he sat by the fire whittling a piece of wood, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years: safety. The first week was agony. Clara's burns wept and itched and hurt with every movement. Elias tended them twice daily, applying fresh salves and clean bandages. He cooked for her simple but hearty meals of venison, fish from the creek, wild greens, and bread. He baked himself in a Dutch oven. "You don't have to do all this," Clara said on the third day, watching him change her bandages with practiced efficiency. "What else am I going to do? Sit around and let you suffer?" He shook his head. "Besides, having someone else here is nice. It's been quiet too long." "How long have you lived up here?" 7 years. Come west after the war, worked as a guide for a while, then just stayed. Built this cabin with my own hands, hunt and trap enough to get by, trade pelts for supplies a few times a year. It's a good life. Lonely sometimes, but good." "Don't you miss people?" Elias was quiet for a long moment, wrapping gauze around her shoulder. "I miss the idea of people. The reality usually disappoints. Humanity has a way of showing its worst side more often than its best. Present company excluded," he added with a small smile. As Clara healed, she began helping around the cabin despite his protests. She couldn't do much at first, but she could sort the beans, shell the peas he grew in a small garden plot, mend his shirts. Small tasks, but they made her feel less like a burden. "You're good with a needle," Elias observed, watching her repair a tear in his buckskin coat. "My mother taught me before she passed. It's one of the few things I'm good at." "That's nonsense. You're good at plenty of things." "Like what? Being a target for jokes?" Elias set down the trap he'd been oiling. "Clara, let me ask you something. How many people in Red Hollow could take what you've taken and still get up every morning? How many would work 16 hours a day, never complaining, just to keep their sick father alive? How many could endure years of cruelty and still be kind, still be gentle?" He leaned forward. "Strength isn't just muscle. Sometimes it's just surviving when the world wants you to break, and you're the strongest person I've met in a long time." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I don't feel strong. I feel tired. Tired of being afraid, tired of being ashamed, tired of shrinking myself to make others comfortable." "Then stop." Elias stood, walked to the door, and opened it. The mountain vista stretched before them, endless forests, sharp peaks, sky so blue it hurt to look at. "You know what I love about these mountains? They don't apologize for taking up space. They don't make themselves smaller for anyone. They just are, massive and beautiful and undeniable. You could learn from them." Over the following weeks, as summer faded toward autumn, Clara did learn. Elias taught her to fish in the cold creek, to identify edible plants, to shoot his rifle. She was terrible at first, flinching from the recoil, but he was patient. "You're thinking too much," he said one afternoon as she missed another target. "Stop worrying about failing. Just breathe, aim, and trust yourself." The next shot hit dead center. "There," Elias grinned. "See? You're capable of more than you know." They fell into an easy routine. Mornings, Elias would check his trap lines while Clara prepared breakfast. Afternoons were for maintenance, repairing tools, preserving food for winter, gathering firewood. Evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. Elias told her about his childhood in Ohio, his parents who died of cholera, the war in Mexico that taught him how cheap life could be. "I've killed 12 men," he admitted one night, 10 in battle, 2 in self-defense after the war. I don't regret the necessity, but I regret that it was necessary. Violence leaves a mark on your soul." Clara shared her own history. The father who'd been her hero until illness took him, the mother she barely remembered, the growing cruelty as her weight increased. "I used to be thin," she said quietly. "But after Mama died, I ate to fill the emptiness. And then people started treating me different, and I ate more because it was the only comfort I had. It became a circle I couldn't escape. You're escaping now, Elias said. Every day you're here, every skill you learn, every moment you choose to believe you matter, that's escape. By the time the leaves started turning gold and red, Clara's burns had healed to pink scars. But more had changed than just her skin. She walked differently now, head up instead of down. She spoke her mind instead of whispering. She even laughed, something she'd forgotten how to do. You should see yourself, Elias said one evening, watching her gut a fish with the knife he'd given her. You're like a different person. I'm not different, Clara replied. I'm just finally becoming who I was supposed to be before the world told me I couldn't. Word of what had happened at the Golden Spoon spread through Red Hollow like wildfire. The three young men's injuries had been severe. Jake Mercer lost vision in one eye, Colt Hastings could barely use his right hand, and Billy Tate carried scars across his chest where he'd torn his own shirt open trying to escape the burning water. Their fathers were powerful men, and they wanted blood. They wanted Elias Boone arrested, tried, and hanged. But Sheriff Dalton, for all his flaws, was a practical man. He rode up to Elk Ridge alone one September morning and found Elias splitting wood outside his cabin. "Boone," he called out, "we need to talk." Elias set down his axe. "Talk then." "The Hastings, Mercer, and Tate families want you arrested for assault. They've got the county judge in their pocket, and he'll sign a warrant." "Then he'll sign it." Elias picked up another log. "But he won't be able to serve it." "That's what I figured you'd say." Dalton dismounted, led his horse to water. "Thing is, I went and talked to everyone who was in that restaurant. Took statements. 34 people saw those boys pour boiling soup on Clara May. Heard them laughing about it. Saw her on the floor, burned and crying. And nobody lifted a finger to help. And I'm not arresting a man for giving bullies a taste of their own medicine. I've got daughters, Boone. What you did, I should have done years ago." He pulled out a flask, took a drink. "But the judge will still issue a warrant. Political pressure. When he does, you'll technically be an outlaw. Can't come to town without risking arrest." "I'll manage." "How's Clara?" "Healing. She'll be fine." "Good." Dalton mounted his horse. "You're a good man, Boone. Misguided maybe, violent definitely, but good. The world could use more like you." After the sheriff left, Elias stood thinking for a long moment. Being unable to visit Red Hollow meant arranging for supplies to be delivered, trusting intermediaries. It meant isolation would deepen. But when he looked through the cabin window and saw Clara kneading bread dough with confident, practiced motions, humming to herself, he knew he'd do it all again without hesitation. That evening, Clara noticed his troubled expression. "What's wrong?" He told her about the sheriff's visit, the coming warrant. She listened quietly, her face thoughtful. "So you'll be trapped up here, because of me." "I'm not trapped. I choose to be here. It's not fair, Elias. You helped me, and now you're being punished. Life's not fair, Clara. You of all people know that." He poked at the fire with a stick. "But here's what I've learned. Fairness matters less than choice. I chose to help you. I'd choose it again. That's what makes us human. Not what happens to us, but how we respond." Clara came and sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You've given me so much. Let me give you something back. You don't owe me." "Not owing, wanting." She took a breath. "Teach me everything you know. How to survive up here. How to trap and hunt and preserve food. How to read the weather and find water and treat injuries. If you're going to be isolated, you shouldn't be alone. I'll stay." "Clara, you have your father, who has weeks left at most." Her voice caught. "Doc Morrison told me months ago. I've been paying for morphine to ease his suffering, but there's no cure. And when he's gone," she looked at Elias, her eyes bright, "when he's gone, I'll have no one in Red Hollow. No family, no friends. Just bad memories and worse prospects. But here, I have you, if you'll have me." Elias didn't speak for a long moment. Then he took her hand, his calloused palm rough against hers. "I'd be honored," he said simply. Thomas Winters died in his sleep on a cold October night. Clara was with him at the end, having ridden down from the mountain with Elias by her side. The old trapper's last words were to the mountain man, "Take care of my girl." "With my life," Elias had promised. They buried him on a hill overlooking Red Hollow, under a pine tree Thomas had always admired. Most of the town attended, not out of love, but because Thomas had once been respected. Clara stood dry-eyed through the service, her hand clasped firmly in Elias's, and met every gaze with unflinching composure. Several women approached her afterward with false sympathy and real curiosity about her living situation. "My dear, you can't possibly be living with that man unchaperoned," Mrs. Pemberton sniffed. "What will people think?" Clara looked at her levelly. "I don't know, Mrs. Pemberton. What were people thinking when they laughed while I burned? I'll take my chances with the mountain man." Mrs. Pemberton had no response to that. As they rode back up the mountain, Clara felt lighter despite her grief. Her father was at peace, and she was free, truly free, for the first time in her life. Winter came early that year, snow falling in thick curtains by mid-November. Elias had prepared well, the cabin stocked with preserved meats, dried beans, flour, and enough firewood to last until spring. They settled into a rhythm that felt almost like music, each knowing their part, moving in harmony. Clara proved an adept student. She learned to recognize animal tracks in snow, to set snares for rabbits, to cure pelts. Elias taught her to read better using his collection of books, and she taught him songs her mother had sung, filling the cabin with melodies it had never known. On Christmas Eve, Elias gave her a gift, a new dress he'd sewn himself from soft deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered, running her fingers over the blue and white beads. "When did you make this?" "At night when you were asleep. Wanted it to be a surprise." He looked almost bashful. "Wasn't sure of the fit, so if it needs adjusting." She kissed him. It was tentative at first, uncertain, but when he responded, pulling her close, it became something more, a promise, a claiming, a homecoming. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I think I've loved you since you carried me out of that restaurant." "I love you too," Elias replied. "Probably since I saw you refusing to apologize for existing. You're magnificent, Clara May." They married themselves that night in front of the fire, no preacher needed. They spoke vows of their own making, to protect, to cherish, to face whatever came together. The mountains bore witness, and that was enough. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Clara discovered she was pregnant in March, and Elias's fierce protectiveness increased tenfold, but she wouldn't let him coddle her. "I'm growing a baby, not dying," she said when he tried to forbid her from checking the trap lines. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," he grumbled, but he let her go, following at a discreet distance just in case. Their daughter was born on a warm September evening, delivered by Elias with steady hands and a prayer on his lips. She came out squalling and perfect, with a thick shock of dark hair and her mother's brown eyes. "What should we name her?" Clara asked, exhausted but radiant. Elias looked out the window at the mountains glowing in the sunset. "Hope. Because that's what she is, what you both are. My hope that the world can be better." Little Hope Boone was 6 months old when riders came to the cabin. Not lawmen, but townspeople from Red Hollow. Mrs. Walsh led them, her face grave. "We need your help," she said when Elias met them with his rifle ready. "The town's in trouble." The story spilled out. A gang of outlaws had taken over Red Hollow, holding it hostage. The sheriff was dead, his deputies scattered. The gang was robbing anyone with money and abusing the women. They'd been there for 3 weeks, and the townspeople were desperate. "Why come to me?" Elias asked. "Last I heard there was a warrant for my arrest." Mrs. Walsh looked ashamed. The judge tore it up months ago after Hastings, Mercer, and Tate admitted what they'd done. He said there'd be no charges. But more importantly, you're the only one brave enough and skilled enough to help us. Clara appeared in the doorway, hope in her arms. It's 30 miles to Fort Bridger. Why not get the army? We tried. The outlaws have men watching the roads. Anyone who tries to leave gets shot. Mrs. Walsh's voice broke. Please. We know we don't deserve your help after what happened to Clara. But we're asking anyway. Elias looked at Clara. She nodded slowly. I'll help, he said. On one condition. When this is over, Clara and I will be welcomed in Red Hollow. No whispers, no judgment, no mockery. We'll come to town when we please, and you'll treat my family with respect. Done, Mrs. Walsh said immediately. You have my word. The rescue took 2 days of planning and 1 night of violence. Elias recruited 5 townsmen who could shoot straight, positioned them strategically, and then walked into the saloon where the gang's leader held court. What happened next became legend in Red Hollow. The mountain man had moved through the outlaws like a winter storm, cold, relentless, unstoppable. When dawn broke, 8 outlaws were dead, 6 were captured and bound, and Elias Boone stood in the town square with nothing worse than a knife wound in his shoulder. We're even now, he told the gathered townspeople. Your debt for Clara is paid. But something had changed in Red Hollow. The people who'd laughed at Clara's suffering had been forced to confront their own cruelty. Many had spent sleepless nights remembering that day, haunted by what they'd done, or failed to do. When Elias and Clara rode into town the following month, baby Hope strapped to her mother's back, the reception was different. People nodded respectfully. Children stared in awe. Mrs. Walsh hugged Clara and wept, apologizing for not protecting her. I was a coward, she said. I should have stopped them, should have helped you. I'm sorry. Clara, surprising herself, forgave her. We all do better when we know better, she said quietly. Now we all know better. The years that followed were good ones. Elias and Clara divided their time between the mountain cabin and a small house they built on the outskirts of Red Hollow. They had 2 more children, a son named Thomas after Clara's father, and another daughter they called Eliza. Clara opened a small restaurant in town, serving food that reflected everything she had learned from Elias. Wild game prepared with herbs from the mountains, bread baked in the old ways, dishes that told stories of the frontier. It became famous throughout the territory, and people traveled days just to eat there. Elias worked as a guide and tracker, teaching others to survive in the wilderness. But his most important work was teaching his children, and any others who would listen, that cruelty had consequences and kindness had power. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Clara and Elias would sit together on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Do you ever think about that day? Clara asked once. The day you changed everything? Every day, Elias replied. It was the day I stopped being alone. I was alone too. I just didn't know it until you showed me what it meant to be seen. Clara leaned against his shoulder. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for being worth seeing. He kissed the top of her head. Though honestly, I just did what was right. You did the hard part, surviving long enough to be saved. We saved each other, Clara said firmly. You from loneliness, me from despair. That's what love is, isn't it? Mutual salvation. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars emerged, Elias Boone held his wife close and thought about justice, mercy, and second chances. He thought about a world that judged people by their appearance rather than their character, and how sometimes it took violence to teach the lesson that should have been learned with kindness. But mostly he thought about how grateful he was that one August afternoon he'd walked into a restaurant at exactly the right moment to meet the woman who would become his whole world. In the end, that was the real justice. not the punishment of the guilty, but the redemption of the innocent. Not vengeance, but love. Not the boiling water, but the cool stream that healed. Clara May Winters had spent years being treated as less than human because of how she looked. But she'd always been magnificent. It just took a mountain man to help the world, and Clara herself, see it. And they lived, as they deserved, with joy and purpose and love, in the shadow of mountains that never apologized for their size, under skies that stretched forever, in a life built on the foundation of one simple truth. Everyone deserves dignity, and sometimes it takes a warrior to defend it.